I'm John Batchelor. Gordon Chang, my colleague and friend and co-host, is here. He's traveling, Forbes.com, and we're very pleased to travel to Burma thanks to the eyes of Kelley Currie, Senior Fellow with the Project 2049 Institute. Now that I've given away where we are, what does this sound like? Gordon, Kelley, this is a contest. You get to play it. July 2014, 4 journalists sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. May 2014, a draft law in Burma that outlaws interfaith marriage. Okay, Kelley, what happened to liberation? Mrs. Clinton and President Obama dancing in the streets in Burma. Don't I remember that 2 years ago? Good evening to you, Kelley.
Good evening. Well, I've been saying not to get your, count your chickens yet here with Burma. It's pretty dicey, and the Obama administration continues to declare victory, but the situation on the ground is not quite so victorious these days.
It must translate better than I'm believing. Gordon, What's happened here? Did the Chinese get back in? What is this banning interfaith marriage, Gordon? That's a trick out of China.
Yeah, clearly. And we've seen so much backsliding in recent months, which is an indication that the administration's policy really hasn't been nuanced enough. What they have really done is, as Kelley said, declared victory. And, the generals have seen that. And what they have been able to do then is to go back to the old way of doing things.
I have a photograph in front of me of John Kerry, Secretary of State, in one of those funny shirts. Kelley says there's probably a Burmese word for it, but in any event, it's heavily gold braided down the front, long sleeves, and he's bending over, because he's a very tall man, to talk to the foreign minister of Burma. Is there any indication that the Secretary of State understands that Burma's slipping back into dictatorship, Kelley?
Well, I think that after this trip, he probably can't help but. He got a letter from a bunch of members of Congress, 73 members, mostly Democrats, including the whole Massachusetts delegation, expressing concern about backsliding before he went. The Kirk-Rubio letter from Senators Kirk and Rubio also, and then lots of questions from journalists while he was there and since he left about the problem. So I think that hopefully some of it got through despite the bubble in Naypyidaw where he was in Burma.
Gordon?
Kelley, I understand that everything about this trip to Naypyidaw was controversial, including where our great Secretary of State managed to stay. Could you talk a little bit about the hotel arrangements?
Yes, apparently he stayed at a hotel that's owned by an individual who is on the sanctioned list, the Treasury's blacklist for people that the United States citizens are not supposed to do business with. And the State Department is claiming that the hotel is not sanctioned, but that's clearly not actually true. And then they've said, well, all the hotels or most of the hotels are owned by cronies, and that is true, but there are 2 hotels in Naypyidaw that are not owned by sanctioned individuals. And the State Department knows this because they, other officials make a point not to stay at the hotels owned by sanctioned individuals. So they're just flailing. The press is having a field day with this. It's been kind of a disaster.
Mrs. Clinton embraced Burma. That was a while back. Has she commented on this? She's been commenting on a lot of things about the Obama administration foreign policy she didn't enjoy when she was at state. Now that she's liberated, has she commented? Has she circled back to the fact that Burma's not what she hoped?
There has not been much indication. I haven't seen anything from her. All I saw is this week there was some comment that she and Ben Rhodes, the president's deputy national security advisor who writes all his speeches, that they're in constant contact or regular contact about Burma because they both care about it so much. So, I don't know. She hasn't said anything publicly, no.
That means she knows about the ban on interfaith marriage, and she knows about the 4 journalists sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. She won't say that that's a surprise to her.
Well, I don't know what she knows, but those things are, out there, and they've been going on for a while now.
Gordon, is there any indication that the Chinese are back in town?
Well, the Chinese have never really left. I mean, they have now had some pretty tough relationship issues with the Burmese government over a dam and over a highway. And I think that's an indication that China is going to have a much rougher ride in Naypyidaw than it has up to now. But nonetheless, the Chinese are still got big investments in the country and still have great relations with the government there. So I think that this is going to be an ongoing story of essentially the government somewhat being embarrassed by its ties with Beijing, because that's pretty unpopular with a lot of Burmese these days.
We put a lot of money, according to the Washington Post. We put $250 million into Burma. The Chinese have poured $14 billion. Again, I'm following the Washington Post reporting. Is there transparency about that money? I remember, Kelley, one night you saying all the free enterprise outfits are showing up in Rangoon, the hotels, the restaurateurs. What about our money? Who's tracking it?
Well, the State Department is supposed to be, and companies are supposed to be reporting about their investments every 6 months. They're supposed to have reporting requirements, but so far a lot of the investors haven't really fulfilled the reporting requirements very effectively. And so you basically have civil society in Burma and here in the U.S. kind of monitoring this.
What it looks like is this was a campaign platform. There's no such thing as too cynical when you're dealing with Washington, Kelley. It looks like it wasn't about Burma at all. It was about flying there together and having a campaign event.
Well, what I've heard recently is that the administration's top priority right now is commercial relations in Burma and, making the way smooth for U.S. corporations to invest there, and that they see the upcoming elections in November 2015 as just they just have to get through those, and they have to be good enough so that everybody can continue to invest and profit from development in Burma.
Gordon?
Kelley, the president is going back to Burma at least one time before the end of his term. Is it too much to hope that he can actually pivot, to borrow a word, and actually get serious about human rights, or is that just really too much to hope for?
Well, all I hear from my civil society contacts on the ground in Burma is this question of why he's coming back. Haven't we given enough to the government, to the regime? My friends there are very frustrated with U.S. policy right now, very concerned that we've lost the thread on human rights and on supporting democracy, especially now that we don't seem to care whether Aung San Suu Kyi is able to run for president or not, in terms of whether we think the elections will be fair. So I think that there's a real concern on the ground about whether President Obama should even come back. And, you're starting to see and hear, I'm starting to hear some people in Washington starting to wonder the same about whether he should go back at all, if it doesn't send the wrong message for him to go back.
Gordon, again, $14 billion by the Chinese, according to the Washington Post. That buys a lot of favors, Gordon.
Well, it certainly does. And, the commitments to put in even more money are going to just aggravate that problem, because the projects they're working on are very large and require additional money. And also, once they're finished, would require additional contact between Beijing and the Burmese. So this is something we really, really have to watch.
Kelley Currie, Senior Fellow of the Project 2049 Institute, Gordon Chang of Forbes.com. I'm John Batchelor.